Greetings, my name is Louise Dente and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. We're here on location at the Restaurant Owners Corp located at 13205 Merrick Boulevard here in Jamaica, Queens. And we're joined by Mr. Raymond Dugue. He is the High Chancellor and the second Assistant President General of the UNIA. He's going to join us for a very informative conversation. Are you ready? Well, I am. Let's go. Welcome to Cultural Caravan.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Well, you know, it's been a while since you've been back, but you and our President General made a tremendous impact on our audience. For those who are not familiar with the legacy of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, or the Universal Negro Improvement Association, can you give us a brief overview of that history?
Oh, sure, with pleasure. The UNIA-ACL, that stands for the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. Mr. Garvey established it, believe it or not, on Monday, July 20th, 1914 in Kingston. And this is as a result of having visited Europe recently, that was from 1912 to 1914, Central and South America from 1910 to 1912. To give you a better idea or a great understanding, Mr. Garvey was born in 1887, August 17, in Jamaica, in the north part of Jamaica, in St. Anne's Bay of St. Anne's Parish. He was a printer. He was apprenticed as a printer at around 13, 14 years of age. He was exposed to a lot of reading because his father was not only a brick mason, but his father had an extensive library, and his father encouraged the reading, which was so important to the Garveys. Eventually moves to Kingston. He gets involved. He learns a lot. He meets a brother by the name of Dr. J. Robert Love, who is basically his first mentor. But anyway, Mr. Garvey has a profound feeling to uplift the race. This is what he wants to do, but he doesn't know how to go about doing it. And so he comes up with this great idea. Why don't I immigrate or migrate, go to another country, make a ton of money, then come back? So he moved on to Costa Rica. In fact, he settled in Limon. And he noticed the conditions of black people, specifically a lot of the Jamaicans that had been working there, specifically on the railroad as well as the banana plantations. And he tried to organize our people. He started a newspaper, but it didn't really succeed. In fact, the authorities were after him. So he had to leave Costa Rica. Then he travels to Panama. Panama, the same thing. He starts another newspaper, La Prensa, tries to organize our people, tries to have our people see a better day can come, but we've got to organize. We've got to believe in one God, one name, one destiny, and of course, race first. Anyway, while he's in Central and South America, he visits Bolivia, he visits Colombia, he visits Venezuela, he visits Honduras, and everywhere he goes, black people at the bottom. And he says, wow, this must be like a universal phenomenon. He realizes if we are universally oppressed because of our race, any solution must involve the race, and it must be first. That's how he comes up with the concept of race first. So then, you know, he runs out of money. He goes back to Jamaica. Now we're talking 1912. So 1910, 1912, he's out of Jamaica. 1912, he's there for a couple months. He has an opportunity to travel to Europe. So he visits England, Scotland, Wales, even Hungary, Germany, France, Spain, Portugal. And what does he see? Again, black people at the bottom. So when he says, wow, this is truly universal. But while he's in Europe, two things really coalesce together. One is he does a lot of research, incredible amount of research. He's going to learn about the pyramids, the Sphinx, what's called the Heru and Maquette, the obelisk, what we call the Tekenu. He learns a lot, and he answers the million-dollar riddle. And that riddle is, brothers and sisters, how do you build a pyramid? No, we're not talking technology. That's not important. But how do you go about doing it? What, people just show up and you build a pyramid? In fact, what they call the Great Pyramid, it took 400,000 skilled Africans working 6 days a week for 20 years to build that Great Pyramid. So Garvey, while he's in Europe, he understands it must be based on a self-reliant, economic, independent platform. He says, that's it. And then he says something else. He makes a complete, profound revelation that the difference between them and us is not just the race, it's the power equation. They have the power, we don't. But the power is derived from the economics. The self-reliant economics must be first. So Mr. Garvey, and the second thing is he's going to meet another brother from Sudan, or Egypt via Sudan, Duzay Muhammad Ali, who finishes the education for Garvey. So Garvey's got the solution. He's got to go back. Plus, he's also running out of money. So he has to go back to Jamaica. He leaves June 28th. He departs from England, Southampton actually, stops off in Trinidad the beginning days of July, finally gets to Jamaica around like July 12th, 13th. By July 20th, he establishes the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. He created it to be a blanket organization, eventually to be a government for the black man. Mr. Garvey asked himself, where is the black man's king and kingdom? Where is his president, army, navy, and men of big affairs? He says, I don't see them. I will help you to make it. Everything Garvey does is to create that association, that government that will defend black people. And the last thing I need to say is, whereas other races instinctively know race first, because of what we've gone through, because of the exploitation, the genocide committed against us, the enslavement, the continued degradation where everything African has to be denigrated, everything black must be termed ugly and disgusting. Because of all of that, Garvey says to himself, guess what, black people? We are beautiful. We can see God in ourselves. All of this we can do. And that's all of this. Garvey's going to create the greatest movement ever that black people have ever done. And let me add, there have been 5 empires outside of Africa that we created. We're talking the Shang dynasty. We're talking the Xia dynasty. We're talking the Olmec dynasty. And we're talking the Kush dynasty in India. The 6th empire, and also the Minoan Crete dynasty out in what they call Greece now. But the 6th empire that we Africans have created outside of Africa was the UNIA-ACL.
As you know, and most people know, unfortunately, forces came about to disrupt the powerful movement of self-reliance that the Honorable Marcus Garvey created. But when he left, he made a famous statement. And tell us about one of those cubs that came after Garvey.
So funny, sister, that you should mention cubs. Garvey was brought up on trumped-up charges. And you have to understand, the first 5 black agents of what is now called the FBI, at that time was called BOI, Bureau of Investigation. The first 5 black agents, they were hired strictly, exclusively to infiltrate and destabilize the UNIA and to destroy Mr. Garvey and his movement. So anyway, they were, in that term, they were successful, meaning the opposing side, the enemy. And so Mr. Garvey was brought up on trumped-up charges about mail fraud with the stock. Anyway, during that case, Mr. Garvey was getting the better of the U.S. attorney. It was amazing. Garvey defended himself, and he was winning. So at one point, the attorney, the government attorney, going against Mr. Garvey, he says to the jury, are you going to let the tiger free? Are you going to let this tiger roam free and win? And Mr. Garvey responded, you may have caught the tiger, but my cubs are roaming free. So we are the cubs of Mr. Garvey. But I believe the finest cub of Mr. Garvey, and I call this man the ideological son of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. That's clearly the Honorable Carlos A. Cooks. And after Garvey was incarcerated, he was at the Atlanta Penitentiary. He started his term February 8th, 1925. 2 days later, he wrote the Atlanta letter to the Negroes of the world. Basically, that was to rally the troops. He was saying, don't be sad, be cheerful, because after my enemies are satisfied, in life I shall be the same, but in death I shall be a terror to the foes of black liberty. If death has power over me, then count on me to be the real Marcus Garvey. I may come in a pestilence, I may come in a plague, but look for me in the whirlwind. I will live in the spiritual. What that means is, and this is directly from our African spirituality, our African connection, where the ancestors cease to exist when we stop discussing them, when we stop praising them, when we stop honoring them. So what Mr. Garvey wanted to let our people know, that even if he were to be killed, which he was, I mean, I'll tell you the truth, I really do believe they wanted to kill Mr. Garvey in the prison system at Atlanta. And what kept Mr. Garvey alive is our people mobilizing and protesting and insisting. I mean, on any given day, you could get 100,000. That's amazing. 100,000 black people, African people in the United States at the penitentiary. And sometimes it was even as high as 150,000 demonstrating. So because of that, they couldn't kill Mr. Garvey. It's similar to, let's say, Nelson Mandela. Even if they wanted to kill him, they couldn't, because it would have been riotous. And so because of that, they had to keep him alive. And so when Mr. Garvey says, look for me in the whirlwind, meaning my spirit will never die, my sentiment, my love of you, of our people. And then he starts off the letter by saying, all I have, I've given to you. I mean, that's amazing. All he had, all Mr. Garvey ever wanted to do is to serve this noble race.
So, as you know, with the departure of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, there were others, and one particular successor was Carlos Cooks. Who was Carlos Cooks, and what contribution did he make to the continuation of the Garvey legacy?
Let me say this. Carlos A. Cooks single-handedly continued the work and the name of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Because you have to understand, Mr. Garvey died June 10, 1940 in London. Carlos A. Cooks had been born June 23rd, 1913 in the Dominican Republic, actually San Pedro de Macorís. His parents were from St. Martin. They were workers in the Dominican Republic. Because you have to understand, in those days, people would travel all over the Caribbean, sometimes to Cuba, sometimes to Trinidad, even as far as Guyana, which is actually in South America. But the migration was always there. And so his parents were from James and Alice Cooks, who were from the St. Martin, who had arrived in Dominican Republic. They had a child in 1913, in June 23rd. They named him Carlos A. Cooks. And this is 1913. Garvey establishes the UNIA, July 20th, 1914 in Kingston, Jamaica. March 24th, 1916, Garvey arrives in the United States. So by 1917, the UNIA is established in the Dominican Republic, and it's going to be established in Carlos Cooks' father's building. Carlos Cooks is born in a household where the UNIA is holding its meeting. So he's going to learn race first, you know, one God, one name, one destiny. Up, you mighty race, accomplish what you will. The black skin is not a badge of shame, but a glorious symbol of national greatness. All of this, he's a very hardworking, very studious student. And so Cooks leaves the Dominican Republic 16 years of age. So he's now, this is now 1929. He gets to Harlem, immediately continues the UNIA. He joins the advanced division. In fact, he's going to be the youngest officer in the history of the UNIA. Just to show you how much of a tough guy he was, when he loved his people. Do you know, in parts of Harlem, you know, prostitution was basically legal. And it was Caucasian men coming in to sodomize and take advantage of our people, our sisters. Carlos Cooks single-handedly, 1932, cut that out. In fact, he got the term undaunted, meaning unafraid. He organized a bunch of brothers and said, we're going to go into this brothel and take care of business. And then a year later, the policemen, we're talking Caucasian policemen on horseback, tried to break up a meeting. There was a big riot. Of course, all this was started by the Honorable Carlos A. Cooks, and he single-handedly uprooted and created businesses in Harlem. And as he said, you don't have to chase and attack aliens, when I mean aliens, non-Africans in our communities. Because, you know, even though we were the majority in Harlem, it was still dominated by Caucasians, specifically Italian and Ashkenazi Jew. So what Carlos Cooks did was he pooled our resources, bought buildings, created employment. He said, we don't have to chastise anybody, just to support them. You know, you have to understand, my sister, there were no refrigerators in those days. So people used ice, big blocks of ice for beverage drinking, for cooling and everything. You would have the Caucasian selling the ice. You would have our people selling the ice. Our people selling the ice would never stay in business because our own people wouldn't support them. Cooks came in and cleared that up. He said, no, race first. This is how we create employment. This is, in fact, Carlos Cooks coined the term buy black. It came out of Carlos Cooks' lips. And we're talking in the 40s. We're not talking 60s. This is in the 40s because Mr. Garvey dies on June 10, 1940. From that time on, Mr. Cooks was the nationalist. He was the foremost black nationalist, foremost progenitor of race first, of one God, one aim, one destiny. And so finally, in 1941, by the way, as early as we're talking 1932, Cooks is already an officer of the African Legion. He's already an officer of the Advanced Division. Garvey's still alive. This is 1932, even though they never actually meet, but they do correspond extensively. And at many points, some of the elders, I wouldn't say had an issue with Cooks, but they just thought his approach could be modified. And they would complain to Mr. Garvey. Mr. Garvey would respond to Mr. Cooks saying, keep on keeping on. He said, I approve, go for it. And so he knew he had the backing of Mr. Garvey. And the other thing is the self-reliant economics where, you know, all these other communities, and this is important for our viewers to understand. You know, we're talking Caucasian, we're talking Ashkenazi Jew, we're talking Arab, we're talking East Indian, Korean. All of these communities control their communities. They control the businesses, they control all of the stuff. In our communities, our black communities, we don't own any of the businesses, we don't own any of the buildings, and we certainly don't control the police authorities, and we certainly don't control the sanitation. All these other communities, they do that. And so Mr. Cook says, this is why we need to patronize and create our own businesses, employ our people. And let me take our viewers to another thing. And this is what we've done at The Rock.
Honorable Carlos Cooks also set up his own organization based on Garvey's principles, known as the African Nationalist Pioneer Movement.
Yes, the ANPM.
Tell us about that movement as it continued the work of the Honorable.
Let me say this. You know, the U.S. government and the powers that be, they were petrified to have one organization with 12 million members, and that was the UNIA-ACL. They know it's better to have 12 million organizations with one person each. That's why there's so many organizations. And, you know, and this was seed money that they proliferated to encourage the division and the destruction. Okay, having said that, Carlos Cooks stood by and watched the disintegration of the UNIA, and that had to pain him. You know, from 1932, when he became an officer, until 1940, he just went along. He is a soldier, he's a warrior, he would listen. After Mr. Garvey passed away, he saw the greed and the avarice that came. And you have to understand, the U.S. government was paying a lot of our people to destroy and create havoc and division in the UNIA. And so Mr. Cooks, 1941, finally decided, you know what? I don't like what I see. I'm going to create an organization. He calls it the ANPM, the African Nationalist Pioneer Movement. It is identical to the UNIA. It has the same colors, red, black, and green. It has the same flag. It has the same concept. And even just like the UNIA had the ACL, which was the business arm, he also had the African Pioneer Syndicate. That was the business arm. In fact, the Negro World newspaper that Mr. Garvey established had the picture of the Pharaoh Khafre, whose face is on the Sphinx that we call the Hiram Emaket. Well, Mr. Cook's newspaper, he called it the Street Speaker, had the same picture, had the same Pharaoh Khafre, meaning it was identical. The one minor difference would be this. Whereas the UNIA's motto is one God, one aim, one destiny, the motto of the ANPM was one cause, one goal, one destiny. But in terms of the language, the syntax, the philosophy, it was UNIA. I mean, everything, the colors. In fact, it was Cooks who was promoting the red, black, and green flag. You know, and the Buy Black, the Miss Natural Standard of Beauty, all of this, by the way, Cooks got from Garvey, because Garvey had those in the Negro World newspaper. So even though it was a different acronym, it was UNIA. In fact, Mr. Cooks is the ideological son of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey.
Now, you raised a lot of points. Today, a lot of people in our community use the Buy Black and probably don't know that it's connected to the great Honorable Carlos Cooks. And for the remaining few minutes we have of this one, and we'll definitely go into part two, can you summarize the legacy and the takeaways that people should have as they reflect on the great Marcus Mosiah Garvey and his connection to Carlos Cooks?
Oh, sure. Look at our communities, and this is for our viewers. What do we control? We may have nice homes, you know, nice lawns. We don't control the businesses. It's the businesses that determine the lifeline of a community. In every community that controls its destiny, they control the businesses. In our communities, we don't. Both Cooks and Garvey comes along and says it must be a self-reliant, independent economics platform, meaning that we've got to create it from the ground up. We've got to pool our resources, come together, and buy businesses. I mean, this is how everybody else does it. See, we come on the scene late, and we don't realize what others have done. All of these other communities that control their communities, somebody sat down and thought this through. And this is the importance of Cooks. But Garvey comes along and makes us believe in ourselves. He says black is beautiful, that God should be in our image, that everything about us, everything is divine, and that we are a truly blessed people. We are truly divine people. Cooks follows Mr. In fact, I'll say this. Nothing Cooks did was not from Garvey. In fact, this is the easiest thing. Everything, the businesses, owning the buildings, creating jobs, and you want to get respect, you want the world to respect you, create businesses. You see how quickly the world will respect you. You see how quickly the police will sing a different tune, how sanitation will do it, how your school system will be better. So we owe a lot to both Garvey and Cooks, but specifically for Cooks, he used the term Buy Black. So anytime we're at a Buy Black event, all homage and praise should go to the Honorable Carlos A. Cooks. And last thing I'm going to say, everything that Carlos Cooks did was to praise and honor Garvey. He never wanted any recognition for himself. He wanted to lie beneath the radar. Everything was for Garvey because he said, between men and gods, Marcus Garvey is the greatest of all.
Now, for those who would like to learn more about, could you tell them the name of the book that currently exists about the great Carlos Cooks?
Oh, yes. There's only one book written by Carlos A. Cooks. It's by Robert A. Harris, who was Cooks' right hand. It's called From Cooks to Malcolm X, the story of Carlos A. Cooks. But underneath it, it's also known as the ideological son of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. The book was written in 1992, and it's excellent. I mean, well, it's the only authoritative. There is a book right now that there is a brother who is writing a book. It's Dr. Rivera. The book is not complete, but I know Dr. Rivera. In fact, I've interviewed him, and he says it openly. I use Robert Harris's book plus the archives and doing my research, but Robert Harris is the only book, and I truly recommend everyone to get it.
Wow. Well, you know, look, it's never enough time, and certainly it's always a pleasure as you take us on a trip through our history and understanding our history. In our next segment, we'll talk more about what the UNIA is doing today in our community. But again, on behalf of Cultural Caravan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Sister Louise. It's a pleasure. And for all of your viewers, please support Cultural Caravan, because there's nobody else who's doing it. And this is a part of the nation building where we support our own, we uplift it, and continue to use it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and we continue to encourage you to tune in, to write, or to tell a friend. But until next time, Louise Dente saying thank you. If you would like to support these broadcasts, we encourage you to send contributions to P.O. Box 300851, Jamaica, New York 11430. Thank you. Let's welcome Joe Patan.
They jumping in the city, West Indian happy.